Incursion.
I've been kicking around this idea for a while now, probably years at this point, mostly because I'm just lazy. So instead of doing a modest amount of work to record all this and put video behind it, I decided to put it off forever and instead fantasize about the next time I teach 10 people from an outfit in the span of a week. I'll have a video to give them instead, so I don't have to spend 1 to 2 hours per person for a large group of people. And then I forget about doing it and I just repeat the whole cycle over again. But this time I somehow managed to muster up the willpower to actually make the damn thing. So, here we are. And with that out of the way, we can actually get into the meat of this video series. So what do I mean by my title? Combat Fundamentals. What is that? I consider the combat fundamentals to be the basic building block that every infantry fight in this game is built upon. The one-on-one fight. And I don't mean a 1v1 like going on Jaeger and dueling somebody. I mean you're in a base, going through a building, and you come across an enemy player face to face, and you fight. No running, just a fight, right then and there. The things you employ in that fight are what I consider to be the basic combat fundamentals. Aim and movement. Now of course Planetside a very large-scale game, and the one-on-one fight is not the be-all end-all. But it is the most basic form of infantry combat you can participate in, and the skills you employ to win in that situation are the ones that are going to help you win in pretty much every other infantry fight. If you're the type of player who thinks their personal performance doesn't matter much because you're part of a team, rather than fighting for yourself, imagine if you will, your entire squad has a good grasp of the basic combat fundamentals. Everybody knows how to strafe properly, everyone knows how to burst, everybody has a good sensitivity, and suddenly you're a much bigger threat. Even against players who have 6,000 hours and can play the game with their monitor off. No matter how good someone is at this game, they still die in the same amount of headshots as everyone else. Of course, you're still going to be at a disadvantage fighting one of these highly skilled players. They have more awareness than you, they have more experience than you, they have more game knowledge than you, and at times, it can seem insurmountable. But once you get a grasp on the basic fundamentals, and you run into them in a head-on fight, that player doesn't seem so invulnerable anymore. And that's what the fundamentals are about. Closing that gap, and once you learn those, you're in good shape to figure out everything else that can move you ahead of the competition. So, let's get started. When we talk about fundamentals, movement is probably the easiest of these to learn. However, that does not make it any less important. In fact, one could argue that it is the most important. Think about this. Most automatic weapons in this game can kill you in under half a second if all the shots land on your head. Now consider that you're only human with a human reaction time, which is average around 200 milliseconds. And on top of that, you have to deal with latency. Not only yours, but your opponent's as well. When you add all those factors together, you're basically getting to the point where you have no time to react. And that is why it is so important to have good movement. So, what exactly do I mean when I say movement? I'm talking about strafing and crouching. Of course, there are other things like shuffling and bunny hopping, but the basics need to be mastered first before you go anywhere near these. When I say strafing, I imagine most of you can picture it in your head. However, there are some nuances that can mean a world of difference. Firstly, you have to strike a balance between changing direction and not changing direction too much. If you just maintain one direction of movement, it makes it very easy to track you. All your enemy has to do is place their crosshair slightly ahead of where you're going, and you're going to run into their bullets. However, on the flip side, if you change directions too often, your opponent's not going to have to move his crosshair very much at all to land shots on you. This is a mistake I see people making all the time. If you jitter in place like this, you become a very easy target. You may as well not have moved at all. So do your best to strike that balance. If this is a new concept to you, you'll find that you're going to have to concentrate really hard to not make any of those mistakes. But over time, you'll find that you do it subconsciously, and you don't really have to think about it anymore. A good way to practice this in a safe environment is to use a terminal. Start with your crosshair in the center of the terminal screen, and once you reach the edge, go back in the other direction. Note that this is only a guideline. You can safely add some variation to when you change directions and how long you hold it for, but just make sure you don't break the 2 rules we mentioned earlier. On top of striking that balance, there's also a couple other things you need to watch out for. We'll start with one of the worst mistakes you could possibly make: jumping. Now don't get me wrong, there are some times when you need to jump, but when you're strafing, there is never a time when you need to jump. There are 3 reasons why this will screw you over. First of all, you can't aim. When you jump, you lose the ability to aim down sights. On top of that, when you jump, your cone of fire expands. And not only your hipfire cone of fire either, but your aimed cone of fire as well. You might be thinking, well, when you jump you can't aim down sights anyway, so why does that matter? Well, when you hit the ground, your cone does not reset immediately either. And if you hit the ground and immediately start firing, you're going to have a cone of fire as if you were in the air the entire time until you stop. This, obviously, is something you do not want to happen. Thirdly, when you jump, you have no control of your direction of movement once you leave the ground. Meaning, you can't dodge, you can't do anything until you hit the ground again. If someone's trying to shoot at you and you're in midair, you are a very predictable target. Another thing to watch out for is hitting W or S while strafing. If during your strafe you start moving closer or away from your opponent, you become an easier target to hit. What matters is that you're moving parallel to them, so make sure you never hit W or S while strafing. If you need to move closer or move away, stop strafing and just sprint. Now that strafing is out of the way, let's move on to crouching. But before we do, I would like to emphasize that the only thing worse than not crouching is crouching improperly. If you're just now learning to strafe correctly, I would forego crouching until you master that. So, crouching is a widely misunderstood thing, and for one very simple reason. What you see on your screen is very different from what the enemy sees on their screen when you crouch. Here's an example. Right now I am tapping my crouch button, just a light tap. On my screen it looks like I'm barely moving, but on my enemy's screen, my entire upper body is ducking down for a split second. If you have played this game for any length of time, you've undoubtedly seen that split second crouch before. And that's all it takes to achieve that, just tapping the crouch button. That type of crouch can only be done if you use normal crouch, however, not toggle crouch. So for that reason, it's better to use hold crouch rather than toggle. But why exactly crouch like this? And the reason is simple. When you crouch, you slow down, and you don't want to do that. You want to be as fast as possible, whenever possible. So now that we're using hold crouch, how do we use it in a fight? And it's pretty simple. Every once in a while you're strafing, just tap your crouch button. No more, no less. Be careful though, you don't want to spam crouch because that'll just make you an easier target. Like I said before, the only thing worse than not crouching at all is doing it poorly, so be careful with how many times you use it. There is an exception to this rule of not spamming or holding crouch, however. And that is when you're using the implant Cat-like, which reduces the move speed penalty for crouching, in combination with weapons with a 0.75 movement multiplier, like an NS-15 or a pistol. When you combine these two things, spamming crouch and holding crouch become less of a disadvantage and more of another tool in your arsenal. But I would caution you to hold off on using strategies like that until you have a mastery over the basic fundamentals. And that's all there is when it comes to movement fundamentals. Check out the next video in the series where we talk about aim and your sensitivity settings.
Double kill, triple kill, multi-kill, mega kill.
I need you out of the place. Full pen. I got it.
Ludicrous kill.
I'm dead. Give me the bats.
Accuracy. Dominating.
Collapse on point.